welcome to Manchester SEO's podcast. This is our second podcast, and we're really grateful to have Bryn with us today. Bryn, I won't do the maths, but many years experience in sales and sales training, and we'll delve into that as we go along. Podcast is sponsored today by Belly Brownies. You supplied us some lovely cakes to keep us going, keep the sugar, the blood sugar levels up as we go along. Bryn, welcome.
Thanks, JC. How are we doing?
Okay. We know each other.
We do. We played a lot of cricket together back in the day.
Yes.
And for my sins, I'm still occasionally turning out.
I think it was like 2000 was the first season that we...
Probably was. Not my first season. My first season was 1969.
Just a few years before. Well, it's great to have you on. Tell us about your business and what you do.
Yeah. I guess if we labelled it, I'd call it a sales and leadership consultancy, in that we help companies to increase sales profitability. That's the aim of the business, really. We work very closely with a number of private equity companies, particularly those who've invested in fairly early stage companies they want to scale. So we typically get brought in to train the sales team, to work with perhaps less experienced sales leaders, to help them to coach, mentor, and develop their teams so that they can drive sales forward and increase results as fast as possible. That's kind of what the investor wants anyway.
Yeah. And so that business is called New World Selling.
Yep. And
through all those experiences and the chats you had with your business partner, Steve, decided to write a book.
We did. I mean, Steve and I worked together for many years at Pareto, who are one of the leading sales development companies, I guess, now in the world, owned by Randstad. And I was the sales director there for 12 years. Steve was really a kind of training guru, really, somebody who'd worked in the training team as an expert learning and development practitioner, but also had a sales background. So came into the team that I ran many years ago, and I remember the first time we ever talked about writing a book was probably about 2010, when we were out in Dallas, Texas, training a business out there. And we were there over the weekend, and it was 105 degrees, about 94% humidity, so we couldn't go anywhere other than the pool. Yeah. And we sat around over a few beers in the pool and just started talking about our thoughts on sales. Steve having come very much from a classical learning and development background, me from very much a sales background, but actually we had very similar views as to what sales was all about, why a lot of salespeople weren't successful, and we said we ought to write a book about this one day. And it took another decade, I guess, until lockdown happened, and we had a bit of time out. So we spent about 6 months writing what we thought was the right kind of book, and until we got professional advice on it, and then realised we'd probably written more than one book, and we had to cut it down, and it took about another 3 years before we actually got it into print, which was almost a year ago now.
Right. Big achievement.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not rushing to write my next book simply because of the time it takes to actually write something, but we think in the end, we had a development editor out in California who helped us with the idea that we had to cut this down and make it not just a kind of what sales is all about, but a really practical guide so that people could pick it up and use it, in the day-to-day roles, which I think it now is. And then we had an editorial expert critique it, and you think your English is good, until somebody goes through it with a fine tooth comb, and it's a bit like getting your homework marked and you get a C plus or something. So that was really money well spent, having those two experts help us to get it to publication. And in the end, we're pretty proud of what we've done, but not without a lot of blood, sweat and tears and a few mistakes along the way.
Well, this is it, Transformational Selling. It's my book. I've read it.
Good.
It's an engaging read, actually.
Good.
Lots of anecdotes and stories to relate to.
Yeah. Well, over 40 years in the business, James, I've got a few more stories over that time, as I'm sure you can tell.
Yeah. So how did it all begin for you? What how did you get to where you are? What was?
Well, yeah, it's interesting when you look back, really, because I as you know, I was a sort of sporting person, probably more than I was an academic. So I'd much rather be on the sports field than in a classroom. And I think you'd probably relate to that. And as a sports person, I was the youngest of 4 boys in my family, so I probably had a cricket bat in my hand from the age of 3, and I was kicking a football around at a similar age. So I played soccer as a kid, a lot of cricket, and then as I got older, I went to grammar school, a lot of rugby, which rugby and cricket were very big in my career. So I've always been very competitive, particularly, again, if you're the youngest of 4, you kind of have to be, and my brothers were very sporty too. So I think the competitive element was what made me think sales was the right kind of move. I would say, like a lot of people, I probably fell into it in the end. I was advised by a couple of people who were older and wiser than me that would be the right kind of profession. And fortunately it was. I'm not sure I'd be good at anything else, to be honest. I don't think you'd want me performing an operation on you or having me as your accountant. So sales is kind of suits my personality, suits the kind of instinct I have to want to win. Winning's always been, I think, as you know, if you play sport at a reasonable level, they say it's all about taking part. It's not really, is it? It's all about winning. We know that. And sales is exactly the same. Yeah. The wins, you have a lot of highs and a lot of lows, but the highs are great. And that's sort of, I've never, even today, I still get that thrill of winning a contract, and also the thrill of if you've run a really good training session and you see people using it and getting results themselves. So now, I guess, passing on 40-odd years of distilled wisdom and mistakes as well along the way help to give keep it real, I suppose, because I can talk from experience of what's worked for me, what hasn't worked.
Yeah. Do you feel so? From my experience, I feel like the mindset of sport relates really well to the sales world, and you talk about that a lot in the book, actually, mindset.
Yeah, and I did a LinkedIn post recently. I think you probably saw it, but I said that the most important sales tool is the one that's in your head, because it all starts with your attitude, your belief system, and your mindset, and you've got to have that belief in the fact that what you're doing is going to benefit a business. Because when you think about why anybody should buy anything, they should only really buy it if it's going to have a material benefit for them, or it's, particularly if it's going to solve a problem. And that's really the heart of sales, really. What problems do your solution solve? Yeah. How does it help to improve their situation? So I think it starts with that mindset, and it's quite interesting, particularly when you train people early in their career, or even experienced people who've been doing it for years. They don't always have that unshakable belief about what they do, and that really holds them back, that limiting belief. So we talk about it being, 80% attitude, mindset, belief, 20% skills. You can learn the skills, but you can't implant that chip in somebody's head that switches their belief system. Not easily, anyway.
No. People that spent any length of time around me will always hear a cricket analogy, and I always think about, we used to open the batting together.
Yep.
And I think opening the batting, you never know, that first ball, you don't know what's coming. You might not have faced the
Yep.
the bowler before, and it's a
Yep.
bit like meeting a client for the first time.
Yeah.
But there's an excitement that comes from that sporting repetition each
Yep.
time, and a belief that comes from it that kind of trains you for the world afterwards, I think.
Yeah, and you know, I wasn't a bad batsman, but there were a lot better players than me. But I think I always believed I was going to do pretty well.
Yeah.
And I think that helps you to get along. If you go in, I'm not saying I was never nervous, but it's how you harness your nerves. I think it's the same in sales, really. If you're doing a presentation in front of 200 people at a conference, it's that fight or flight syndrome. And I would say to somebody in that situation, well, why do you think you've been chosen? Why have you been asked to do it in the first place? If you start to use those positive anchors, in sport they talk about visualization, imagining yourself doing well. Well, imagining your best day in sales. Why did you win a particular deal? Sort of using those anchors to help you when you're in an unfamiliar situation. So it's not a million miles different from opening the batting and not knowing what the first ball's going to come down like. I've been out for first ball once or twice myself as well, James. I was once out first ball before the season started. It registered 129 once in April when it started at 130, and I was clean bowl first ball. So I've seen the lows of cricket and the lows of sales. But as you know, when you get that 50 or very occasionally that 100, there's no better feeling.
I once had a game at university where I drove the minibus. It was 3 hours down to Newport, and we got our first ball of the game was a long hop. I put it straight to square leg.
Oh, right.
And then we lost, and I drove 3 hours home. Good day.
Yeah. Well, we've all had those in our time, and I've done it where I've driven 4 hours each way to a meeting that was a complete waste of time. So it's not dissimilar from that point of view. So I do know those slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, I think, as Shakespeare would have said.
So when, any sportsman, they might have a poor run of form, and then you start to question your ability, what you're doing in the world, and that can happen with sales, can't it?
Very much so. I think, confidence and belief is a huge part of what makes a successful salesperson. But it's easy to have that confidence knocked when you get a lot of rejection or things aren't going your way. You lose a big deal, or a big deal that you're expecting to come in for whatever reason doesn't happen. I was talking to one of the salespeople the other day about a couple of deals they've been working on. One that's kind of 7 figures, and it's not happened. And he said, I'm either one of the worst salespeople or one of the most unlucky. And I had to say to him, look, I always look at what could you have done differently. A bit like getting bowled by a really good ball. What could I have done differently? Or that long hop you dispatched down somebody's throat. If you did it for 6, you did a different complexion on it. But when it comes to selling, I'm going, trust in the process. If you keep doing the right things day in, day out, if you keep working hard, and it is 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration sales. If you keep working hard, eventually those results will come. And I said to the guy, I've been in your situation. I said, and I've also been the following month where something has just fallen into my lap. Yeah. And I've never been able to quite explain why some of those deals I've worked really hard on don't happen. Yeah. And some deals just happen quite easily. But what I can say is if you keep working at it, if you trust in the process and do the right things, results will come. And I think that's the same in sport, really. If you keep doing it, you'll see it. Somebody, as I think it was Alan Shearer, said that before Euro 92 or 96, whatever it was, he hadn't scored for England for 2 years. Yeah. And then suddenly he won the Golden Boot. So I think you've just got to stay with it, really. And it's the same if you're an SDR, somebody who's making a lot of phone calls, and probably a lot of graduates in that role. if they're making loads of calls and they're getting the phone put down on them, or they're just not getting through or getting past the gatekeepers, what are they doing? What do they need to do differently? Constantly always reviewing what you might need to change, but not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, keeping the things that you're doing well going, and eventually starting to see over time that you are making some improvements. One of the keys to that, which is often understated and definitely underdone in companies, is there's nowhere near enough coaching from management. And that's a serious issue, because when you think about how most sales managers and sales leaders get into their roles, it's because they were good at sales. But it's a very different skill set to coach, train, mentor people in your charge than it is to go out and sell. Going out and selling is quite a selfish profession. Being a manager is quite selfless, because you've got to put a lot of time into others to develop them. I'll often say if I'm training a bunch of sales managers or leaders, what's the most important role in your job? They'll say, is to develop my sales team. I'll say, how much time do you spend doing it? Probably no more than 5%, in a given week. So I'm going, so the most important part of your job is the time you spend the least amount of time doing. It's just crazy, isn't it? But it's true in most companies.
It's fascinating when you've worked in different companies, different sizes, how you, from my experience, I fell into recruitment when I graduated.
Yep.
And the manager was a fantastic trainer. Really inspirational. He'd talk you through everything that you were supposed to be doing and what was working, what wasn't. He was always around.
Yep.
And then I moved away from sales to more IT focused stuff, and I was in this huge, I won't name the business, I was in a huge company, and you could see it was failing. They bring graduates in, they put them on a 2-week training course, and then they'd leave them to it. There's so many of them, and then you could see that they were all struggling and something wasn't really working, but there was no real support and development once they're doing it.
Well, when you think about sales as a profession, and it is a profession, as you know, it's not an easy profession to become good at. When you think about it, how many other professions kind of give you a week or 2 weeks if you're lucky, and then throw you to the lions? I mean, you wouldn't have an accountant doing your tax return going, I've never really done one of these before, I'm new to this, or a lawyer representing you if you ever had to go to court, going, I don't know that much about this particular case law. You'd be shocked by it. These people spend 5 years in studying before they're really let loose into the world. Same with a doctor. But in sales, you could be in operations, you could be in a technical role on the Friday, and somebody could have come along and said, well, we need somebody in more of a sales role. You seem like you've got the right sort of personality. Should we give it a go? And they get parachuted in without really any understanding of how to go about a sales process, all the things that you need in your locker, I suppose, to become effective. And then they wonder why they fail. And a lot of salespeople fail. I was in recruitment for probably 16 years in IT sales recruitment. I interviewed several thousand people. I can probably remember maybe 20 or 30 of them now who really stood out. So maybe like 1 or 2% of people who I thought were really exceptional. And a lot of also rans and quite a lot of people who really probably shouldn't have been in sales in the first place.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I would say it's a tough world to be in from a mental and emotional side of things.
I agree with that. And with the kind of growing awareness, I guess, of mental health and its effects on people, I would strongly advise anyone thinking about going into sales to think twice. I'm not saying don't go into it, but I'm saying for two reasons, really. One is it can be emotionally draining, particularly if you don't have the resilience and tenacity to tough out the bad times. And that's not having a go at anyone, that's just a reality that you're going to have tough times. Last year, for many companies, especially companies, say, in recruitment, it was really tough because people weren't, and I've been through 3 or 4 recessions in my life, and been through some pretty nasty times. But you kind of have to roll with the punches, and that's not an easy thing to do if you've got any kind of emotional fragility, I suppose, that might mean that would cause you to sort of suffer mentally. And I think I would add to that, there are incredible, maybe not so much now with the travelling, but there are some incredible physical demands on selling. You know, I've spent certainly when I joined Pareto, I probably spent 45 weeks a year travelling up and down to London every week. You know, that in itself, when your first meeting's at 9 o'clock and your last meeting probably finishes at 5:30, 6 o'clock, then you're on your way back home, or you're travelling down the night after a day of work, and or you're driving all around the country. It's a physically demanding job, as well as, you know, one that can really get you mentally. So it's not to be taken lightly, the consideration to go into that role, I would say. I think maybe now a lot of this stuff's done online. The mental side of it is probably bigger than the physical, because people aren't having to travel as much to meet. Whereas, you know, there are a lot of salespeople I know in the past, and I've done it myself, where, you know, you're hopping on and off planes every week. Into different countries, and that itself is, people think it sounds glamorous. But you rarely only see, you know, a boardroom and a hotel room most of the time you're doing that.
And sleeping in different beds it takes you out of you in different time zones, and, you know, I've done it myself. It takes you out of you. I got out of recruitment because I was struggling getting on the phone. It was relentless every day. And so I moved away, and then since then I realized that the skill set involved with what I was doing is something that is really useful and transferable in other roles. And I think it's really what helped me build the SEO business, where not only is it organizing your time, but it's also being able to communicate with people, being able to motivate staff, investors. You know, everything is sales, I think, especially for small business owners.
And communication is really an interesting one, because if you were talking about core competences, if you like, for sales, I mean, we talked about confidence being probably, you know, a key attribute. I would say good communication skills. I think that's got a little messed up in the last few years with the growth of, originally email and then social media. The way we communicate has changed significantly from the old-fashioned pick up the phone or go out and meet somebody. And not always for the better, in my view. I mean, whilst I think there are a lot of pluses to being able to have a cadence in terms of contacting people, starting to engage with them either through, you know, means such as LinkedIn, through social media, through email, I don't believe that you really influence and persuade people that way. In fact, very often the messages can get sort of the wires get crossed or disconnected, and that's why I think you get a lot of spats on social media, because it's that anonymity behind it. Whereas if you really had let's say you had a conflict situation with a client, or the client wasn't happy about something, you can't beat going to meet with them and having that conversation, or even picking up the phone. And I say this to people who perhaps fear conflict. I would say you're going to get conflict. You're going to get things that go wrong sometimes. But what happens when you pick up the phone and have a conversation with somebody? What generally do you come off that phone thinking? And nearly everybody says the same thing. That went better than I thought it would. And that's because the human interaction, once you talk to another person, normally you can have a reasonable conversation, but we seem to have either lost that, or we hide behind other forms of communication, such as, well, I'll just do everything via email. I get, I don't know, 10, 20 emails a day from people trying to sell me something. They just stay in my inbox. A lot of them don't get through because they get into spam.
Yeah.
You don't persuade people by sending them an email. It could be a good follow-up. It can be a good starting point. But I feel pretty strongly about it that when people say, "Oh, cold calling's dead," well, I don't call it cold calling. I call it prospecting. Prospecting to engage whether there's any synergy between us or not. Let's have a conversation over a few minutes to decide whether there are mutual grounds for taking that any further. That, I think, is the essence of how a sales process has to start. And the people who do that well, in my opinion, still are going to be the ones that are more successful.
I had a call yesterday from someone selling SEO to me.
All right.
And it made me think a lot about, our chat today, actually. And how I think there's a lot of time wasted by a lack of research and a lack of discovery. And I know that's kind of something that you're big on.
I think how you start a conversation, I mean, one of the things that we say, whether we're training, and we definitely say it in the book, is focus on being interested rather than interesting, because you've got to get into somebody's world and find out what's in it for them to have that conversation. Why would they want to talk to you, and what could you potentially offer them that they would gain advantage from? Sure. If you think about that as very much as a guiding point, so many emails are all about them, their company, what they do, and prospects not interested in that in the first place. It's like, why are you calling me? What possible benefit could I get from keeping you on the phone and having a proper conversation with you? If you can't establish that within the first 30 to 40 seconds, you're probably dead in the water. It sounds like that might be what happened on that call.
If I'd had more time, I might have, wound him up a little bit, but see what he knew about SEO. But
I get people saying, we're a prospecting company. We can get you. We can contact 8,000 clients for you to get lots more meetings. I'm like, that's the last thing I need at the moment. I want to try and dumb down the work. It's great to have the work that I've got, but I don't really want any more clients right now. If any clients are listening, that doesn't mean I wouldn't have a conversation, by the way. But right now, I've got plenty of work. I'm on one person. Well, Steve works part-time within the business as well. But generally, from a delivery point of view, it's me. And I'm getting to that point in my life where I don't want to work 70 hours a week anymore. No. I like the work that I do. I have no plan to retire. But going back to that original point, make it about the client. Do that research. Find out what might be happening in their market, in their particular sector. And start with something relevant and link it back to what you might be doing with other companies. So if you're doing what we'd call an elevator pitch, i.e. if you met somebody in an elevator or a networking event, or if you hadn't ever spoken to them before, talk about who else you work with, what problems they tell you about, how you help to solve them, and what outcomes they get as a result of engaging with you. Those 4 key elements together can be done within 30 seconds, and then just ask them a question. Then you can get into discovery. Which of those issues that I've just mentioned resonates with you the most? Which of those do you find, the most kind of relevant right now? And if they say none at all, follow it up with, so what would you say your biggest 2 or 3 challenges are in 2024? Try and question them to find something that they would like to improve. If you can't do that, there's probably nowhere to go in the call. No.
One of the inspirations for this podcast was meeting so many. Done a lot of networking last 3 years, and I've heard so many interesting stories about how people grew the business.
Yeah.
How they started, what was there, and they're all slightly different. Is there any? If someone came to you and said, "Wish I really need some new business," what would be the process that you would take them through in terms of where would you begin?
I think the first thing that's really important is what they definitely call in the tech world your ICP, your ideal customer profile. Sure. So understanding how to target whatever you are selling, who's likely to be interested in that, A, and B, who would have a propensity to be able to spend money. Sure. And want to spend money. So there's no point, hammering away at people who are never going to buy or are never going to have the budget to buy. So try and work that out in the first place. The second point I'd say is try and aim as high as you can in terms of the people within that organisation. So when it comes to the level of authority, certainly in my time at Pareto, people were encouraged to go after people with a D in the title, or a C in the title, a chief this, a chief that, a sales director, an MD, a human resources director, head of learning and development. Go for people higher up, because the worst that can happen there is they can delegate you down to somebody else, but it's unlikely you're going to get delegated back up the food chain. Sure. So, 3 things really, I guess. ICP, fix your target, and then focus on that target. Secondly, make sure those companies are in a position, let's say, for example, are in growth mode. That's much more likely they'll want to be spending money to build their business. And thirdly, make sure you're targeting the right personas within that industry. And personas, I mean, what job roles and what kind of typical challenges would those people have in those job roles? Because if you focus on the KPIs, the metrics those people are targeted on, you're looking at which of those metrics perhaps do they want to improve the most, or are perhaps where they need to be right now. I know it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but there's no short answer to how you start a business and how you target. But knowing your target, it's interesting actually. You raise that, because when I first became sales director at Pareto, we were going after all the big names, your Googles, your Microsofts, and Cisco's, these type of companies, and several of those companies we actually ended up working with. But what I realised was our sweet spot, as what I'd call it, your target market, were what I termed, and this is not meant to sound disparaging, I termed in the oily rags market. I meant things like manufacturing, logistics, telco, fairly commoditized businesses that had a lot of salespeople, but probably they weren't very well trained, and the differentiation within that business was fairly marginal. Right, yeah. So if you are a logistics business and you're, supplying a client via road or air or sea or whatever you do, why are you really different from another business? And what happens in a lot of those businesses, you end up on a low margin because the client doesn't see the differentiation. So training people as to how you run a really good discovery, how you differentiate from your competition, and how you then gain commitment to the next step became a real win for them. So that's where we found the biggest spend was companies going, yeah, it's tough in our market. We really do need sales training. Whereas you went to a Microsoft or a Cisco, they'd go, yeah, we've got really good sales training programs already in place. Yeah. So trying to find where there's a gap, if you like, and then aiming to fill that gap with whatever your product or service is or does.
Do you have a favourite sales story that you like to tell from experience?
Oh, golly.
I know there's probably thousands.
Well, I've probably got 2, if I can be as brief as I can. One, both of which are anecdotes in the book. One is being told to go forth and multiply in no uncertain terms by a client when my first boss gave me a piece of white carpet to sell, and he said it was a new artificial ski surface. Yeah. And I went up to Rossendale Ski Centre, put it on the manager's desk, and he said, "What is it?" Said it's a new artificial ski surface. It's going to revolutionise the market. It's going to prevent injuries, because the product on the market at the time had holes in it and you could catch your thumb, dislocate your thumb. And he told me to, well, all I would say is the second word was off. and when I sort of questioned him, I've never had such a hostile opening to a meeting because he was really angry. It turned out he was also the secretary of the British Skiing Association, and he said every new product has to be vetted and passed by standards. Okay. So I had that fight or flight moment where I was like, I've really not done my research. This was well before Google, so it wasn't so easy. I didn't realise that the centre manager was also in a voluntary role as secretary of the most powerful body that we would need to meet. But then I had that kind of light bulb moment where I thought, well, what stroke of luck? And we ended up having a 2 or 3 hour conversation about it. And at the end of it, we walked out, him having signed a contract to trial it on his nursery slope. Wow. So that was a major kind of moment for me where I could have walked out with my tail between my legs, but then I had to tell my boss that I'd fallen at the first hurdle, the first fence. I didn't, stayed with it, and it just showed you that if you can prove a need to somebody, no matter how resistant they might be to start with. So that, I think, is a good message for anybody who thinks clients are going to be difficult when you pick up the phone. That they're not going to be difficult if you can find them a need. Yeah. And probably the other one, which is about changing people's perception, was 2016. I had to fly to Paris to pitch for a very large training contract for a major adhesive company, €2 billion business owned by a 7 billion chemicals business, both of which were French. And I was I was up against 2 French businesses just after we'd voted for Brexit. So I was like, my chances of winning this are slim to none. So I had to do something completely different in the meeting. There'd been a kind of tender process to get into the last 3. But this is the first time we'd met. I got a bit of luck in that 2 of the MDs in the room were Irish. And halfway through the presentation, which was going quite well, but I thought, ultimately, they're going to give me to a French business unless I do something different. I asked a question that changed the dynamic. I said, when this training's over, whoever wins it, how do you plan to protect your investment? I said, what do you mean? I said, well, what thought and provision have you given to training your sales managers? And they hadn't put any of the management training in the contract. It was all sales training. So we in Transformational Selling, we talk about leveraging your expertise. We said, from our experience, we find the most successful training interventions are where you train the sales managers first to make sure they can coach, because training is an event, it's a process. So whoever does the training, when they leave the building, how are you going to make sure you maximize your return on investment? This led to a whole other conversation, which not only won us the contract, the contract was about 150,000. It added about another 40,000 because they decided that the idea of having management training was good, and it enabled us, therefore, to win it. Yeah. So it's sometimes challenging your client's thinking. You know, the old adage that the client is always right, we don't really agree with that. We think the client's right about what they want to achieve. They don't always know the best way to get there. And sometimes having that conversation with a client and challenging their thinking can work for you, as long as you do it in the right way. Sorry, it was a bit long-winded, but you know, the 2 stories there, one really around, you know, changing your mindset that not all clients don't, you know, that clients won't want to talk to you. That's what a lot of people think. Well, they won't if you can't show them something that could be beneficial, but if you can, they probably will, if they can see how it can help them. And the second, reframing, I guess, somebody's thinking to get them back onto something not only that leads to your solution, but also probably creates a better outcome for them.
Fascinating. I think that's a good place to probably end it.
Yeah, okay. And sorry if I've ranted on a bit, James. You know what I'm like. I never been short of a word or two.
You're not a fan of talking about it. No, I think they're really valuable stories to end on. Some good lessons there. If there's a business out there that thinks you might be able to help them, how would they find out where you are?
Yeah, they could always email me at bryn@newworldselling.co.uk. You'll see a website, www.newworldselling. As well, you can find us there. If you want to look on my LinkedIn profile, Bryn Thompson, direct to New World Selling, you can contact me via LinkedIn.
And you can also get the book on Amazon.
Yeah, it's available in book form, audio form, or Kindle as well.
Right.
All three.
Well, I definitely recommend it. And thanks for coming on for a chat.
Thanks, James. Great to see you again.